to see what's happening now, having been written about like 3 years ago by somebody. This is something that I think is very likely to happen. And I think, people that hold Bitcoin, that care about that ethos still, need to think about, if their bags get pumped, what will they do with that money to preserve financial freedom? Because I don't think the U.S. government or, BlackRock or some of these other entities that have become very bullish on Bitcoin are interested in protecting privacy or having Bitcoin be used for freedom money necessarily.
Whitney Webb begins by highlighting how the Bitcoin community has become increasingly focused on price appreciation rather than its original purpose as a tool for financial sovereignty. She points out that early adopters saw Bitcoin as a way to circumvent centralized financial institutions and governmental control, yet today those same institutions, including BlackRock and major U.S. financial entities, are embracing Bitcoin. This, according to Webb, represents a fundamental departure from its original mission. She argues that the push for mass adoption has overshadowed key concerns like privacy, censorship resistance, and decentralization.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
And I think a lot of people have, including in the Bitcoin space, have become very obsessed with the number go up mentality and are not really interested in the ideology that helped popularize it among certain demographics. And personally, I think my interest in Bitcoin, it's the only cryptocurrency that I see as really having any value. I mean, don't mean to swear, but everything else to me is pretty much a shit coin. But I would say that it really depends on where things go from here, and the extreme interest of, the traditional financial system and the U.S. government, which the ideology of Bitcoin was opposed originally to working with those two entities, and sought to, supplant them because, they are bad. That kind of is the original part of the original Bitcoin ethos that has been sort of shed in favor of mass adoption, and the idea that holders of Bitcoin will become extremely wealthy, and the concern, and the idea about having freedom money or privacy money, and all of that has sort of definitely taken a back burner and may disappear entirely from the discourse. And I personally don't see that as positive. I think if we're going to move into the digital money space, and there's this push to eliminate cash, I think anonymity and privacy is important. The argument is that, well, bad people will use it to money launder and all of this stuff. And sure, that's true. But even if we go into a new digital system, I really doubt that the CIA and some of these other entities that engage in that same type of behavior will be forced to stop. I think it'll be money laundering for me and not for thee kind of thing. And also a lot of people that use those, privacy enhancing protocols and products aren't money launderers. They just don't like mass surveillance, which again was part of the, early ideology common among people in the Bitcoin space. And so, the idea that there was this, that it was going to challenge fiat and bring more financial fairness to the world and our debt-based monetary system and put us on a hard money standard, and all of this, a lot of that has sort of gone out of the window. And the idea of, Bitcoin, sort of use it as a new petrodollar analog. You want to play with Bitcoin, you need dollars to get access to it. Essentially, this is sort of the theory of my colleague Mark Goodwin, who wrote The Bitcoin Dollar, that I would really recommend for anyone that wants to see what's happening now, having been written about like 3 years ago by somebody. This is something that I think is very likely to happen. And I think, people that hold Bitcoin, that care about that ethos still, need to think about, if their bags get pumped, what will they do with that money to preserve financial freedom, because I don't think the U.S. government or, BlackRock or some of these other entities that have become very bullish on Bitcoin are interested in protecting privacy or having Bitcoin be used for freedom money necessarily, And so I think that stuff personally to me matters, and is one of the reasons that I've, tried to speak to people in the Bitcoin space for some time, because I think a lot of those people do care about the ethos, but I think there is sort of an effort to flood the zone, if you will, with this idea that it doesn't matter anymore, and that we should sort of, surrender that ethos in favor of, becoming extremely wealthy. And that is going to be persuasive for a lot of people, especially when we're potentially facing a debt crisis and an economic downturn. And, historically, that type of, drastic wealth increase for people can be very persuasive and getting them to change their ideology. But I would argue that, the direction the world is going, it's important to think about what we can do to preserve freedom. And if you're expecting to have a major increase in your ability to finance things, maybe consider financing things that help ensure privacy and help ensure financial freedom, and ensure that Bitcoin could become freedom money and not just a strategic asset for a few very powerful people.
Another major theme in Webb's discussion is the concept of financial weapons used by the U.S. empire. She references leaked military documents from WikiLeaks that describe how the U.S. dollar and institutions like the IMF and World Bank have historically been used to exert control over global economies. According to Webb, Tether is a modern iteration of this strategy, allowing the U.S. to extend its financial influence under the guise of decentralized finance. She warns that in a world moving toward digital money and the elimination of cash, surveillance and financial censorship will become more prevalent.
That one of the co-founders of Tether and some of the other people involved in early Tether appear to have significant intelligence ties. Some of them, like Brock Pierce, have ties to pedophilia scandals that happened in the early 2000s. Tether since then has come under fire for being not transparent about its reserves, among other things. And it has also been memory hold its role in the FTX scandal, where you had Alameda Research being very involved with, the Tether supply and helping it maintain its peg, among other things. And we, of course, know now that FTX was involved in all sorts of financial misconduct, for lack of a better word.
To put it nicely. Yeah.
Yes. And, Solana, which has been responsible for these pump and dump meme coins, among other things, was also very closely tied to Sam Bankman-Fried. He's been called one of the main reasons behind its rise in popularity, for what it since has become. And there's no shortage of examples of sort of pump and dump meme coins that have sort of rugged people of a lot of money, and what has that money ultimately led to, and who was ultimately responsible for that pump and dump rug pull, wealth transfer, arguably, type of operation. It definitely would facilitate this type of bad behavior that we know intelligence agencies have engaged in with the past, like the BCCI example. It would definitely facilitate that. And the fact that you have these types of connections there, I think is certainly worthy of examination. And Tether notably has a lot of the same rhetoric that BCCI once used, the idea of, banking the unbanked, for example. But they're very willing to seize people's money on behalf of the U.S. Treasury. And Paolo Arduino, who is the head of Tether now, has said that Tether is fully committed to expanding U.S. dollar hegemony globally, and has, onboarded the FBI and Secret Service on that platform, on their platform. And that essentially makes it a digital arm, you could argue, of the U.S. government. And when you also consider this military manual that was published by WikiLeaks, well over a decade ago, they referred to basically the dollar and some of these style of financial institutions that help propagate it globally, particularly in the global South, as sort of financial weapons of U.S. empire. And it's very possible, and I think, I think an argument can clearly be made that Tether is sort of facilitating specifically in economies that have become unstable or have very unstable currencies. And some of that is partly due to U.S. sanctions. Some of it is due to these entities that have been called financial weapons of U.S. empire, like the IMF and the World Bank. And then their currencies are unstable. They're covered in, they're trapped in this debt slavery model, which is a big reason for in many cases, for a lot of the economic instability, and people are being onboarded onto the digital dollar, onto Tether, as a way to be able to preserve their wealth. But ultimately, it's kind of a way to globalize the dollar and covertly dollarize a country without formally dollarizing it, in the way that places like Ecuador and El Salvador were formally dollarized. And if you consider the outsized role, including in the digital asset space, and sort of its formation and the infrastructure for it of some of these currency speculators, and the role of currency speculators in the past, we can point to in the 90s, George Soros, or arguably people like, Jeffrey Epstein, if you're familiar with my work, having a role in, crushing local currencies. If that were to happen today, and there's no reason to think that type of currency speculation like, Soros style in 92, for example, doesn't happen today, I'm sure it does, then the end result could easily be people just sort of onboarding to the dollar, particularly a form of the dollar that is surveillable, seizable, and ultimately programmable. And those were the same concerns that a lot of Americans have had about central bank digital currencies. It's not necessarily that the money would be issued by the central bank, because money is issued by the central bank now. Right? It's about the concern that it presents to liberty, because it's surveillable, programmable, and seizable. And I think Tether checks all of those boxes, ultimately. And really any sort of digital dollar that the U.S. ultimately approves, which is very likely in the Trump administration. At his speech at the Bitcoin conference last year, said no CBDCs, but was very bullish on stablecoins, on dollar stablecoins, which are a major purchaser of U.S. treasuries, for example, and help service the U.S. debt. And if you combine that with a lot of his bullishness on Bitcoin, the talks of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, for example, I think it's very possible that we could see this type of digital dollar paradigm that Tether really helped start expand. And I don't think there's really a lot of discussions about whether this is good or what the potential origins or intentions of it were or still are, because a lot of people that promote Tether have very rose-tinted glasses about it and parrot this idea of banking the unbanked and sort of ignore the FBI Secret Service connection, the fact that they've seized people's money when the U.S. Treasury Department has asked them to do that, even if they're not U.S. citizens, and this type of stuff. What does this ultimately mean? And I think people that are particularly in the Bitcoin space, which has often been sort of flooded at times with the opinion that Tether is a Bitcoin company, should consider that, especially when a lot of the rhetoric and ideology around Bitcoin was about stopping the debt slavery system and the debt-based monetary system. Do people really want to perpetuate that? And is it really conducive to financial freedom and banking the unbanked in a way that is good for liberty?
Webb ties her discussion to the broader context of stablecoins, particularly their role in supporting the U.S. national debt. She notes that stablecoins like Tether are major purchasers of U.S. treasuries, effectively making them instruments of U.S. financial policy. This aligns with former President Donald Trump's statements at the Bitcoin conference, where he opposed central bank digital currencies but supported U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins. Webb suggests that while Bitcoin was initially designed to challenge the debt-based monetary system, it is now becoming increasingly intertwined with it.